Hello and welcome to this little Spalluccipedia video where we're going to dive again into the world of Sam Spallucci, my fictional investigator paranormal, who allegedly lives and works here in my town of Lancaster. Now today I want to have a little look at the werewolves of Sam's universe. Along with vampires and sort of like mummies or monsters, the nameless created things, they are one of the big three tropes, big three characters of the horror genre. They tend to be presented differently from age to age, I think is the best way to describe it. There was a big movement, I suppose, if you want to call it that, to portray the werewolf as sort of like this tragic character for quite a while. Probably going back to sort of like the 1920s, the Wolfman, I think it's probably fair to say. On one hand, you had Dracula, who was this big, like, brooding presence. You had Frankenstein, who was tragic. You know, the Frankenstein's monster anyway was tragic because he'd been created and had no control over his fate. And then the Wolfman was also seen tragic in a similar respect to Frankenstein's monster, because he was the victim of a curse. You know, this curse had been put upon him, and there was nothing he could do about it apart from sort of like try and make as least mess possible until he eventually died. And this sort of carried on and on, I suppose, this idea of being a victim of a curse right through in sort of like the 70s and the 80s. I mean, my first introduction to the werewolf stories was American Werewolf in London. At the tender age of about 11, I think it was. My dad had got himself this new video recorder, and he'd heard about this movie, but he hadn't been able to go and see it, so he knew a mate who could get him a copy. So he decided it'd be a very, very good idea to sit down and watch this family fun entertainment. Yeah, the nightmares that followed. But that's a completely different story. What I really want to focus on is the fact that, you know, the main character there again was cursed. It was not his fault. He was a werewolf. You know, bad stuff happened to this guy because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And also, when we look at sort of like genres which came after that, you had vampires versus werewolves. The vampires quite often were seen as the paddies, and the werewolves were a plucky little underdog, quite literally. Very, very lupine as opposed to canine, I suppose, but still underdog. And we always found ourselves rooting for the werewolf. You know, perhaps it's a class thing, I don't know. You know, you have the idea of like these supercilious, these like uber rich vampires in their like gothic towers and whatnot, whereas the poor werewolf was literally left to rot in a kennel or whatever, you know, in the sewers of London or something. So, you know, we as Joe Public could really feel for the werewolf, whereas we couldn't feel for vampire, which something I've talked about in a previous Spalluccipedia video. The notion that the vampires we've always had in like fiction don't seem to be the sort of person we can relate to, which is why I changed them in my universe. But as I changed the vampires in the Spallucciverse, so I changed the werewolves. And this probably does go back to like my trauma as a little 11-year-old watching American Werewolf in London and being scared absolutely. I didn't even need to bleep that. We'll just go, you know. So to me, werewolves are always going to be the baddie. And so in the Spallucciverse, I created the bloodline of Abel to go against the children of Cain. Children of Cain being the vampires, bloodline of Abel being the werewolves. And they were born from vengeance. You know, we have the line of the blood of Abel cries from vengeance from the ground or from the stone or whichever. And in their little creation myth, after Abel has been killed, this wolf comes along, drinks his blood, and is infected with that vengeance. And so, like the vampires, they also lurk in the shadows. But whereas the vampires in the Spallucciverse are a force for good, at least they're supposed to be, you know, they're forced to look after humanity. The bloodline of Abel have got this uber big chip on their shoulder. You know, they want to strike back. They want power. They are hungry for power. So they will be insidious. They'll infect those around them and draw them into their cause. And we see this in Bloodline, Sam Spallucci Bloodline, where Vincent Stone, who is like the head of the Bloodline, certainly in the UK, is building up this little empire for himself. He's got hold of the potency. He's using the potency for his own nefarious means, and he's going to use that to increase his power base, you know, globally. But he draws people in. You know, he draws them in. He perverts them. People who would normally be sort of like normal people. You know, they've got their flaws. Everybody's got their flaws, but he exploits that. And he turns them over to his side, making them his own personal little cabal, his personal little army. And I could say what happens. I'm not going to, because again, that would be spoilers. I don't want to ruin stories for you. But I really enjoyed writing Bloodline. Noticeably that it's actually the Sam Spallucci book which has actually taken the shortest amount of time to write. Less than a year from beginning to end. It was something which I had kicking around in my head for a long time. You know, probably going right back to this whole sort of, you know, werewolf experience as a kid. I remember writing werewolf stories at a very young age. I think I may have actually sort of like given some in at school. It's like year 6, year 7, and probably scared a few teachers like, oh dear, he's a bit troubled lad, should we do anything about it? You know, so there are probably conversations in the staff room, I don't know. But some of the scenes I've got in Bloodline were actually written, oh, what are we now? At the time of recording this, I'm 50, so probably about 40 years ago. Yeah, and they developed, you know, they changed over the time. But this notion that the werewolves are bad, there is nothing good about them, that's been there right from the word go. We see it in Bloodline. We see it in the prologue stories, that Orion's Child and Orion's Hunter, which are in the short story anthologies. And we see it in the case of the Werewolf of Williamson Park. You know, the werewolves are obsessed with power. They are obsessed with being better than everybody else, with grinding everybody else down underneath them. Like I say, they have this big chip on their shoulder going right back to sort of like beginning of their time with Abel. And of course, they have this relationship with the potency. Now, the potency was this mystical stone which created in heaven by the fallen angel Asmodeus, split into two, the building of the Temple of Solomon, by an unknown person at the moment, although it might be known by the time we get to see this video. If it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't. I'm not saying now, spoilers. And the werewolves know that they can use it, so they use that potency to help them change whenever they want. And Stone goes one more, he turns it into this like serum. But the potency is not happy about this. The potency, as she puts it, she just wants to play with her big clay toys, constructs, and she feels that the werewolves are just using her, they're abusing her. So, you know, it doesn't take much for it to turn on them. Will we see more werewolves in the future? I'm not going to say no, but we have to bear in mind that the Bloodline story sort of does bring their art very much to an end. I have certain things planned, little side things, so I have to wait and see on that. But for now, I hope you enjoyed that little ramble, and it was a bit of a ramble. Stay safe. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.